Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Adam Smith, and it's my great pleasure to be your guide to this Nobel Prize dialogue entitled United by Science. To start things off, we're going to have some words of welcome. And first, I'm very pleased to introduce Laura Spreckmann, Chief Executive Officer of Nobel Prize Outreach.
Thank you, Adam. On behalf of Nobel Prize Outreach, I would like to welcome you all to this Nobel Prize Dialogue. Bienvenidos a todos a compartir esta sesión con todos nosotros. Humanity is facing serious challenges. Take health or climate, for example. This has shown us, this difficult period we're living through and have been living through, how important science, research, and collaboration are for us all. Today, 80 students from 24 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean will gather to discuss how science can contribute to society and how society can contribute to science. They will be meeting 5 Nobel Prize laureates to discuss this. These 5 Nobel Prize laureates are Elizabeth Blackburn, Emmanuel Charpentier, Ben Feringa, May-Britt Moser, and Saul Perlmutter. Dear laureates, thank you so much for putting all your commitment into speaking with this group of brilliant students. Dear students, take this opportunity to think, to learn, and to discuss, not only with the laureates, but also with your peers, and hopefully continue that discussion after the session in terms of many long-term collaborations among all of you. I heard that conversation already has started, and I'm very happy about that. To finalize, I would like to thank Helena Nader and Luis Davidovich at the Brazilian Academy of Sciences, Jeremy McNeil from IANAS, the Inter-American Network of Academies of Sciences. Also, of course, to all the members of the IANAS. To our dear Nobel International partners, 3M, ABB, Capgemini, Ericsson, and Scania. To my dear colleagues for all the fantastic work you're doing, and not least to you, Jakob Rubensson, our great producer, who has managed to bring us all together. Together, united by science. Thank you so much. Muchísimas gracias. Obrigada. Enjoy.
So as Laura mentions, this is a partnership with institutes in the Americas. And in a moment, we're going to hear from the co-chairs of IANAS, the Inter-American Network of Academies of Sciences, that Laura mentioned, Jeremy McNeil from Canada, and Helena Nader from Brazil. But first, it's my pleasure to introduce the president of the Brazilian Academy of Sciences, Luis Davidovich.
Hello, I am Luis Davidovich, president of the Brazilian Academy of Sciences. The Brazilian Academy of Sciences is thankful to the Nobel Outreach and to IANAS for their partnership in this very important event. We also thank the Nobel laureates for participating in this dialogue. Latin America and Caribe face common challenges, and we must unite by science in order to seize the opportunities and tackle the problems that affect this region of the world. The rich biodiversity, the extensive hydric resources, the rich cultural and ethnic diversity coexist with strong inequality, deficient education, and the destruction of biomes. This Nobel dialogue, which I'm sure will be a great event, is a powerful instrument to motivate the leaders of tomorrow to engage with science. Science changes the world. Thank you all for your participation.
Hello, my name is Jeremy McNeil. I'm a behavioral ecologist who works on insects. I'm also the president of the Royal Society of Canada and the co-chair of IANAS. There is no question that globally we are faced with many problems today, and there is no question that science will be a major part of looking for the solutions. Therefore, IANUS is absolutely delighted to join with the Brazilian Academy of Science and the Nobel Prize Outreach Organization to bring together some of the leaders of tomorrow with several Nobel laureates under the banner United by Science. I would like to thank both the Nobel laureates and the young scientists for participating in what I am convinced will be an outstanding event. Thank you all for your participation and have a wonderful time today. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Helena Nader, co-chair of IANUS, and I'm glad to welcome you all to this great event of the Nobel Prize Dialogue, Latin America and the Caribbean, in partnership with the Brazilian Academy of Science and the Inter-American Network of Academies of Science. Initially, I want to thank each academy for the support to put this program together. As already mentioned by my colleagues Luis Davidovich and Jeremy McNeil, 80 undergraduate and graduate students representing 24 countries in the region are going to discuss with 5 Nobel laureates on issues that include the responsibilities of the scientists, the power of collaboration, strategies for building bridges with policymakers and society in general, and the wider societal implication of all these things. Science is fundamental for the social, sustainable, and economic development of societies. The debate may bring common strategies to combat the great challenge in which Latin America and the Caribbean are immersed, from climate change to political instability, passing through many inequalities and the effects of this long COVID-19 pandemics. Thank you so much to all of you, and I pass the word to you, Adam.
Thank you, Helena. And now let's get on with the first discussion. So, Liz, Blackburn, Saul Perlmutter, Ben Feringa, Emmanuel Charpentier, welcome to you all. Now, you have all been involved earlier in the week in discussions with this wonderful group of students from across Latin America and the Caribbean. And now we have the chance to explore what you thought of those sessions. So, let's start with you, Saul. What was it like meeting this group of, 16, 17 students from all over the region?
It's always just a pleasure to hear the engagement and the enthusiasm that everybody has when they start out, and then of course it's also very clear that everybody's concerned about how do our careers work and how do we help our societies manage in the complexities of the world that we see and the political worlds that everybody finds themselves in. So for me, it was a great starting point.
Mm. Because of course the discussions were there to explore the very broad theme of how can we make the most of science and scientists. And Helena Nader in her introduction mentioned many of the topics that we touched upon. It's a broad canvas that we covered in those discussions. We began with the topic of really what it takes to be a scientist. Liz, how did you find the discussions?
Well, I found them wonderful. What a wonderful group of young scientists, and I felt very lucky to be talking with them. And as usual, it cheers me up because I think the world may not, the world may not be in such bad shape when we have such terrific young people who are, as Sol said, fully engaged in science. And so I thought it was very interesting because when we talked about responsibilities, some of the discussion really went into situations where if you can't really be in control of various things, and you're trying to do your science, and there are pressures on you to get different kinds of results. What do you do? So these are very real world questions. So we had that was one of the terrific topics that I particularly was struck by with this group of young scientists.
Thank you, Liz. Emmanuel, how did you find it?
Yes, the same. It was very refreshing and always a pleasure to discuss with students from Latin America. For sure, one can appreciate very fast their concerns with regard also to the poor infrastructure for doing research in their countries compared to Europe, Asia, or America. So this is always also, I think, important that they raise also their concerns and specifically with regard to the fear of not being able to combine research, a career in research, and private life or family life. For sure, the concerns that there are a lot of challenges in the world right now, and that they feel a little bit stuck in a system where they don't see really themselves evolving and being able to make the difference. I think it's various complex issues, but it's at least what was very enjoyable is to see how much they were enthusiastic, and I thought that their questions were terrific. I mean, I thought it was extremely well prepared, and I think I was very, very surprised to which extent this group of young scientists were really prepared, asking the right question. There was a very nice flow in the way they were also interacting. I was very impressed.
And Ben, it would be lovely to hear your thoughts too, just to get us started.
Thank you, Adam. I must first say that I had a very stimulating and pleasant 1.5 hours discussion with the students. It was really a feast to discuss with them, because the level of questions, as was already mentioned by Emmanuel, I think was really high. I was really impressed how they were prepared. And honestly, after this session, I felt a little bit sorry that I was not a student anymore at the beginning of my career, because I was confronted with this enthusiasm and spirit. And now, after all those decades, I know what it is to be a scientist, and also going through the frustrations and so. And this came up also during the discussion. Of course, it's not only glitter. You have also the periods that things don't work, how to do research, how to build a program, but also how to deal with uncertainties, etc. But this is all part of being a scientist. But what really struck me is that they had questions and discussions about not only about the scientific issues, but also about ethical issues, how to forward science in the context of current politics, especially also in South America, of course, where the level of funding probably for science is not what we expect or what we see in Europe or in the United States or in Asia. So I was really amazed by the spirit of the young people at the beginning of their career.
So the discussions took many strands. Part of it was focused very much on the business of just getting on with your own science and how you make the right decisions for yourself as a scientist. And those concerns, of course, are common to scientists all over the world. Did any of you spot anything different about the way that these group of scientists from the Americas were asking those questions that were, that differentiated them from groups of students in Asia or Europe or anywhere else where you meet students? Is there anything that springs to mind that was particularly different about the way they did science? Anyone?
Maybe I might reflect. It's maybe not so much about the way to do science, but to get the opportunity to experience what we have in the scientific family. Because I think in Europe, for instance, we were discussing this. We have Marie Curie programs and all these programs where we exchange students and they get this international experience, etc. And this is so crucial for young students, to have these opportunities that they can go to conferences or to a different laboratory or whatever, when you are a master's student, a PhD or whatever. And I realized that this was a type of, a point of concern for several of the students, which I hear less in Europe when I discuss with students, because they know there are many of these programs and so. Luckily for the European study student, and I think if you can do something for the students in South and Middle America to help them, to get more engaged with the global scientific community, I would be happy to help there.
Liz,
can I add something too? Along the same lines, one of the students brought up the question of open access and how the financial burden is placed upon the authors. And for people who are in situations where funding is very tight, they said spending a couple of $1,000s just up front to get something published is really, really prohibitive and inhibitory. And so we discussed, both very sort of immediate but also really the necessity for systemic changes in, the open access movement, while very welcome, has shifted a burden, as we all know, to authors, and that is disproportionately hard on those whose funding situations is very limited, as was the case with a number of the people on my discussion group.
Liz, you read my mind. That was a beautiful segue, in fact, into a very short video piece of Yasmin from Guatemala raising exactly that question, the person you were referring to. And it would be nice to hear from her. Yeah. So let's play the video from Yasmin.
And I want to talk a little bit about science publishing. I think that's a very important topic. And now many journals are moving towards the goal open access, which is very expensive. And we are talking about united science, but it seems that developing countries are being left out of the system. So
yes,
we will have more access to scientific literature, but our opportunities to publish will be reduced and severely impacted. So what do you think we can do to change this, or to just reduce bias in scientific publications? Or do we have to always rely on science being done elsewhere?
It's a very stark and worrying comment, that closing statement. So Liz, you were in conversation with Yasmin. How did the conversation develop?
Well, I had some thoughts, but I actually would be interested, since you said we have to have dialogue here, I'd be interested in hearing what the other laureates say when confronted with this question, because I'm not sure all my answers were as complete as they could be. So could I throw the question, Adam?
I'd love you to throw the question.
To somebody else as well.
And I think
I'm going to be recorded on this previous one anyway, so you can access what I said.
Saul, your broad smile means you're first.
So I was just thinking in the big picture that science has such a strong tradition of international cooperation, and that it's such a the possibilities of science pay back everybody when it's done in an open international form. And I think that we've not been able to tell that story as well as we could to all the funding sources which tend to be in the wealthy countries. And they tend to think of it as if it were a zero-sum game. If they keep their resources close at home and fund everything happening in their own in their own country, that's the best for them. And I just think it's a mistake. I think that that if we were able to convey that sense that almost every program should be available to people from countries that don't have the resources to do it themselves, I think it'll benefit all of us. And it's also just one of the cultural aspects of that science can provide the whole world at the same time. So for me, I think if we somehow are able to tell that story better in every one of the wealthy countries, so that there's a better understanding that this is not a zero-sum game. This is something where the more we develop everywhere in the world, the better off we all will be. I think maybe there'd be some possibility of shared resources for countries that cannot afford these publications, but more than that, even the examples of the fellowships that were mentioned in Europe. I think all these resources should, if we can, be made more internationally available.
Ben and Emmanuel, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this question of does science simply have to be done elsewhere? Ben, first.
Yeah, no, we discussed a bit during the meeting about this being part of this worldwide scientific family, you know, and this is a privilege that you can discuss, you can meet, you have share information with people all over the world. And I think what was mentioned just before by Saul, I think this is really important that we have an open discussion, you know, and we give opportunities for sharing our science and our data and information, the publications. And of course, when there is communities that have less access, we should do something about it. For instance, the publishers or especially the learned societies, which own a lot of the publications or so, they can, and I know this happens, for instance, the Royal Society of Chemistry, where I'm a member of, I mean, I know they have programs in Africa, for instance, for sharing information to countries that cannot afford certain journals, etc. We could also team up to build communities in a different way. You know, cities around Europe and communities have partner cities all over, also in Eastern Europe, etc. And we could do something like that, you know, that our universities have partner universities, like we have already established. Several of our universities have established that, and we could do maybe even more there if the financial is the real problem, you know, if the financials are the real problem. So I think there are opportunities, but definitely a positive, very positive attitude. Make it accessible to the young people that start their career. There should not be obstructions for learning or getting access to the most recent information, the frontiers of science.
Thank you very much indeed. Emmanuel, please.
No, I totally agree. I think the science belongs to everyone and should be made freely available all over the world. Specifically because the scientists all over the world are contributing to reviewing the articles which are published in the journals that are not often accessible to countries of reviewers who have reviewed the paper. So it's even silly. So I think, it's no doubt that there should be, I think, a strong, obviously, movement from the scientists to also, let's say, maybe have more control on the way the journals are evolving in our days, with editors who are not specifically scientists, active scientists. And sometimes I feel that certain journals became a little bit too much marketing. Deciding also on the topics that are supposedly of more interest than others, and I think I believe that scientists should control a little bit more and make sure that diversity is still published and have more the control on the choice of those journals. Mm.
Thank you very much indeed. So many strands to pick up on in so little time, publishing and the telling stories in science and funding. Let's talk about funding for a minute. I'd like to play a video from Stephanie from Colombia.
Colombia is the second country in Latin America that have the highest investment in military spending. What do you say to the leaders of countries like Colombia so that they understand the need to invest in science and not in war?
So one of the reasons that we pulled this group together with Ayanas and our friends in Brazil, was in order to create perhaps a little vanguard of young scientists who would go out and help develop the regional approach to science in Latin America, along with everybody else involved. And this question, how should we talk to governments, is a very good one. Who would like to address that?
Well, I'm happy to lead with one thought, which is that in the US, when funding for the National Institutes of Health is discussed in Congress, one of the points that is brought up is how beneficial it is for the region or the city or the state getting federal NIH funding. It is for both jobs creation and multiplying the wealth of that region or city. And so numbers are cited which are very compelling, where something like for every job that the federal NIH funding funds, you get 3 or 4 jobs out, or some number like that. And there's very accurate things. So I think that gets at something which, we as scientists, we want to say it's so valuable to have science for health, for the benefit of the planet, for, just for our cultural understanding of the world. But that argument won't necessarily resonate with many government people, but it will resonate if you make clear the very obvious and demonstrable economic and job-creating benefits that at least the health and biological and life sciences funding creates. So that's one approach.
Thank you very much, Liz. Anybody else on that question?
I fully agree what was said. What you see is, because this discussion often happens also in countries like Holland, where you maybe would not expect that you constantly have to defend, why science is so important. But luckily, when you come with the arguments that there will be spin-offs, that the young talents, start, there will be new companies, and jobs, etc., based on these discoveries and knowledge and the output of science, especially the natural science and the medical sciences, you suddenly see that they change their mind, and they have a different kind of discussion. And this week I was at a meeting with many people of the government and CEOs of the major companies. And I brought forward, realize that knowledge is economic power. And that will change. That will change the attitude of CEOs and also government officials and politicians. They know that in the future, knowledge more than ever, will dictate where your country stands or how the economy will develop. And so I think we have good arguments, to make a case for science, and and that should be done also in over there, to help them.
Mm. This question of funding levels of science came up across the region, and indeed in some of the feedback we received from the students, one of the things they said was that, I thought things were difficult just where I am, but actually now talking to all these other students from around the region, I see that, many people are in the same situation. Did you detect a sense of hope among the young people you were speaking to, that things can change and that, the situation of science and their situation as scientists is going to improve?
I would say my group, I felt was probably, right there on the edge. They were listening for indications of, what were how welcoming was the world going to be to them. And so in some sense, I think they're open to hope, but at least the group that I was meeting with, and I think they're very excited about being able to join in. But I think they are looking for signs of encouragement that that the world is going to be meeting them halfway and trying to help.
Indeed,
I got a real sense of their commitment. That was the thing. I got the sense they were going to be in science, right? And so perhaps that's not the same as hope, but actually, it's as good as hope, which is to actually be in it. They were in it, and it didn't look like they were about to leave and be discouraged. Yeah. They were certainly very realistic in asking questions.
Yeah, it was a fantastic advertisement, wasn't it, for the region? Absolutely. Okay, another thing that came up was not just to talk about how to talk to governments, but how to talk to everybody. And I'd like to play a nice clip from Isaac from Costa Rica.
I don't have a question, but I wanted to comment on this one topic that I really think is one of our major challenges if we really want to be, as the name of this event says, united by science. And that's basically science being for the people. The dissemination of scientific knowledge is a commitment that we all as scientists must assume. Many times the notion of us working for society is neglected, and we let ourselves believe that that science exists. It's like within its own bubble, far away from the outside world. And this is evidently not the case. We ought to universalize access to science and the benefits that may come with it.
Okay. So, how do you speak to everybody about the benefits of science? Emmanuel, how do you tell the stories of science?
How do I tell the story of science? As it was already mentioned, science is about knowledge, but it's also about education, actually. And this goes along with what the Colombian young fellow was mentioning. about how to convince a government to invest in research. I mean, actually, I don't know whether my colleagues will agree, but in addition to doing science, we spend a lot of time educating young scientists, some of which will not actually continue in science, but can carry on with them the certain scientific methodologies that they have learned, and they can apply to other fields and other topics. And that's why for me that it's really important. Science, it's about knowledge and education. Not everyone will maybe be a scientist, but the education we provide to the scientists is very critical. And I think it's about also providing an education that allows more and more people to appreciate the value of the science, of the research, of the discoveries, of really, how should I say, invest in science and research. Yes.
Thank you very much indeed. Saul, I heard many of the young people we were talking to express their desire to be advocates for science in the wider public, amongst the wider public. What do you think the best strategy for doing that is?
Well, I would like to echo something that Emmanuel was mentioning, which is the sense that this is not what science is doing is not just a body of knowledge that people can transfer to each other in science education, but it's an approach to understanding the world and an approach to understanding problems, and in some sense a very self-questioning, humble approach that allows us to ask, are we making mistakes? And looking for how we can understand a world that's full of uncertainty and be able to use the probabilistic information that we have. So I think that to the extent that scientists can ask others to join in the game and be part of that in their day-to-day lives, I think that already is a big start. The other element of it is that when it comes to making decisions that depend on science, I think the scientists can play a role in helping invite others in to first of all understand the scientific elements that are necessary to make the decision, but also that the scientists are not necessarily the owners of the values and the goals that is as part of that recipe to make a decision, and that we want the scientists to meet the society in a very open way, so that we make decisions that respect the truths about the world, but also respect the fact that we have societies that have to make decisions based on their values and their fears and goals and desires. And that combination is something I think that scientists have not usually had a chance to really work on. But I think now, in these recent years, it's becoming very obvious that this is one of our responsibilities as well. And I think the students in our discussions, I think were saying things that felt very similar. That they were interested in trying to tie into the societies in those ways.
Mm-hmm. I mean, worldwide, though, this phrase of being in a bubble that was used in the video we saw is a problem. That there are pro and anti-science factions still, and this is a big war that is being fought, I fear. Ben, how do we tackle it? Oh, Liz, go on, Liz, you go first.
Sorry.
Let's go ahead. Well, I'm sure we all agree on what's just been said, which is so important in big picture. But there's another thing which we've been learning in terms of the climate crisis and the the lack of vaccination crisis, let's call it, and so that is that people get their information often from people they trust, and so this concept of a bubble, made me think of something that I talked about a little bit in my session earlier with the smaller group of students, and that was that if you as a scientist go and do talk to people, then you are now a human being, and if you're part of the community, you're out there and you're seen to be just, somebody who goes and, buys their loaf of bread from a certain place, and you talk to the shopkeeper there and they know, yeah, this is a scientist. This isn't some strange person in a white coat alone in a lab. And so I think actually one of the things we can do as scientists is to get out of our bubbles and actually just, show ourselves as human beings. And when I had young high school students, do summer projects in the lab, one of the reasons was that I thought it was really important for them not to see me, you know, the old scientist, but to see the young people in the lab who, hey, they were totally relatable people. These were scientists. So I think we can show our humanity to people in every way possible, as well as giving them all the information and clearly communicating. That's another part, because what has been learned is that people are, you know, people listen to those around them who they kind of interact with as people. So we should take heed of that information that's coming from behavioral science and make use of it.
If I may paraphrase you, maybe we should retitle our Nobel Prize dialogue, United by Science, United by Humanity.
Be nice, yeah, be nice. It'd be very nice.
Thank you. Thank you for the thought. Ben.
Yeah, I fully agree with what was mentioned. I want to add, you know, we had also a big discussion about this, this part of, about this, how to go to society, etc. And you know, what we also do is we go with students, just was mentioned before, you know, with students to schools, to public events, etc. And having, together with young people, you know, young students, people like we had in the audience here, go to schools and so, and show them, you know, what scientists do. And also what is really important, an important duty here, that what we maybe don't do enough, but more than ever, this becomes important. Go this outreach, go with good examples, you know, where science made the difference, because the public will understand that. How did we get smartphones? How will we get electric cars? How do we change things in society based on scientific knowledge? Yeah, and explain then how science works, and that sometimes it takes 30 years before we have something, you know. These vaccines did not come in 1 year. Explain a little bit to the general public, you know, why it took 30 years that we can now develop vaccines in a year. And also that we have uncertainties, yeah. Don't expect that there will not be a new Einstein in 200 years that says, oh, but you were a little bit wrong with your theories. I mean, this kind of debate with society is really important. And then, of course, also a critical attitude, because we got completely flooded, and all these young people experience the same, flooded with information. But what is information that is useful, you know? And I think there the general public is also struggling. And then there is influencers and so, and they get easily then put on the wrong track, because they cannot distinguish between, this is already, it's difficult for me, it must be the same for you. What is really valuable information in this tsunami of information we get these days? So there are fantastic challenges, but we can do something about it. And I'm convinced it's our duty as scientists to do that.
I think we have to increase trust in science, right? What sources of all those sources we're talking about, which are the ones to trust? And that means people need to trust scientists. And so I think, you know, we need to look to our profession and say, what are the things that make people not trust scientists? And, you know, we need to be aware as scientists too, that the public will sometimes.
It got me thinking about diversity. And I think we cannot talk about diversity without talking about the challenges that we learning people face when trying to be scientists. So knowing the importance of diversity in science, I would like to point to the implicit bias that we letting, and also Black scientists like myself, fight against.
So that's a question specifically about the difficulties of being what is currently a minority in science and how to make your way in science. One could broaden it also to the question of how to talk to diverse audiences. But who would like to tackle this question of diversity? Emmanuel, would you like to go first?
Yes, I believe that there have been some tremendous efforts to increase the internationality of labs. This is one thing. But for sure, the issue of the diversity in science is, I believe it's less about the internationality in labs in Europe and in the US, which is, I think, happening or that has been increased over the years, is more the diversity in terms of giving an equal opportunity for those scientists who are in countries that are don't have the opportunity to really develop the research the way they would like to do it, to offer them the possibility to do so. So I think it's more a global effort to let's say, continue to support and increase the diversity of scientists in Europe, in the US, and in Asia, and in countries where the research is well-funded or potentially well-funded, but certainly increase the diversity in science globally by increasing the funds and the programs in those countries that do not have access to an infrastructure and to a level of research like in other countries. And I think I understand the diversity in this matter.
Thank you. Ben, would you like to comment?
We also discussed about this issue, and I mean, in general, when you look in laboratories like in our country, or in America, so you see this already a great diversity. I mean, in my own lab, we have people from 14 different countries, from all over the world, and 40% is girls, which is quite high for the chemistry department, I think. But in general, I think we see an upward trend, but that does not mean that it's the same everywhere in the world. But this is what I wanted to emphasize already in the beginning, that we have this global community. We don't have borders or fences, or we go beyond the frontiers, and we want to have family all over the world. And this is the beauty of science. Young and old, can be engaged in this science family and science community. And that is typically how we cooperate, I think this happens in many laboratories where students approach, hey, could we be involved in a program or whatever? And I think governments could do even more, to stimulate that also across the world. We have programs with China, with Japan, but of course around Europe. You have the Fulbright fellowships with students exchange with the United States and Europe. But this could also be done on a wider scale, and then the diversity to include people from all nationalities. I particularly, of course, students that come out from less developed regions or have a situation where it was not per se obvious that you went to get educated at the universities, And I told them the example of my own background. I'm from a very, very small village, a farmer's village in the eastern part of the Netherlands, where nobody went to the university. At the time I was in elementary school. But due to the fact that my parents stimulated us and we had the opportunities in the Netherlands to get grants for studying, it made it possible. Yeah. And you see now that this has changed completely in the last 30, 40 years. Yeah. So I'm very positive, but we should not wait, we should do something, about it and stimulate organizations to help us to make it possible that students can exchange. Because coming from South America to Europe or the other way around is expensive. You need some funding, you need some bursaries, whatever. So it's great if we take action there.
Thank you. Ben, you mentioned the issue of gender in science, and I just wanted to throw in a nice clip from Gonzalo in Argentina.
And I want to talk about inequality, gender inequality in science, as you were talking before. I wanted to ask Elizabeth's opinion about how we young men researchers can contribute to eliminate these inequalities, and what would you say to a young girl that wants to start a research career in this very patriarchal world?
So Liz, people can see your answer to that in one of the sessions that's coming up, as you've said before. So Saul, go on, why don't you address this question? What can young men do or what can men do to eradicate gender inequality in science?
I mean, it's obvious that this has become one of these key questions of our time that people are trying to grapple with, to try to figure out what can be offered to help from a group that's already in a community to groups that have been traditionally not as welcome. And I think that part of the job is always one of as quickly as possible being able to get the role models, as as Emmanuel and Elizabeth are playing that role all the time, to be visible and for the men to be looking out to be aware of in what situations there's a lack of representation that doesn't need to be there, and that one can actually try to make it clear that that particular community is supposed to be welcoming to the entire set of students who might join in. But I think this is always a challenge because it's a bit of a snowball effect that you're trying to figure out how do you make sure that it doesn't self-fulfill the scene that you see around you in the older generation when the next generation comes in, and that the next generation feels comfortable and feels energized to take on these new roles. But of course, I'm it's one of these ones where I'm always looking for further other people's ideas. So I don't think I know more than others on this.
Thank you, Saul. Thank you very much indeed. Very briefly, Emmanuel, what advice would you offer to a young woman thinking of entering science?
I think, life is not maybe easy when you're a woman in science, but life is not easy when you're a man in science neither. So, I mean, for me, what saved me was, I don't know, obviously, what saved me is an education whereby both my parents were working and my father was supportive in the family, like my mother was. So I started with no really opinion about specifically men and women. For me, it was normal to see men and women working and equally participating in the family life. So it was maybe exceptional from my father's side for his time, because he was born in 1929, and I think it was relatively rare to see men involved as such in the family and supporting also his wife who was working. Having said this, what saved me was just to think that I was a scientist, to know that it will not be easy, but to focus on the fact that I was a scientist prior to being a woman or a man, and this saved me a little bit in surviving in this field that is quite a male field indeed.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, so in a moment, the audience are going to have the chance to watch you all in conversation with all these young scientists and see all these issues raised. I mean, the conversation we've just had, I think, has brought to the fore some of the topics that are going to be discussed or were discussed, and has also represented a little bit the lovely diversity of people that we have involved in these discussions in the questions you've seen by video in this session. As a closing thought, and we have just a few seconds, one of you, I want to say some message to the students who we met, just to give them some kind of closing message on what you think they should do to make science and scientists most effective. Who wants to go? Just one of you. Jump in.
Yeah, I can start.
Good.
I think it's what I said to some students. I think it's very important to consider that they should be the actors of their own life. I mean, they describe a future that is quite negative, but if they want to change it, they are the only ones who can change it. If they expect our generation to change it, it may not happen. So they have to be the actors of their own life, and that is important.
If I might add, my message to them: follow your dreams, don't give up.
My message would be persist and use your science for good.
And I've also been emphasizing to everybody that they should find what they're really, really passionate about, and that will carry them through all the ups and downs. If they're enjoying the what it is that they really are getting to work on.
And if I may add, one message is don't follow instructions, because there you are. I told 4 Nobel laureates only one of them could speak, all 4 spoke. What can you do? Thank you all very much indeed. It's been absolutely fascinating. Pleasure speaking with you. Thank you. And that's it for this session. Thank you very much for listening. And now, please join us for the next discussions, in which you'll be able to choose from 5 different sessions, each featuring 1 Nobel laureate and around 16 or 17 students from around Latin America and the Caribbean. Watch them all in conversation, select between them. You can jump between sessions if you like, and then please join us back here for the closing session. Thank you. Welcome back. I very much hope you've enjoyed the amazing energy and diversity of the student discussions. And now we come to our closing session, in which we're going to have a chance to talk to 4 of the students who've been discussing things with the Nobel laureates. I am absolutely delighted to introduce Sofia, Ignacio, Patricia, and Ariana. So, Sofia, you're from Honduras, Ignacio from Chile, Patricia from Bolivia, and Ariana from Brazil. Welcome to you all. This is like the after party. You've all had the main event, and now we just get to relax and talk about how it was. So I would like to ask you all, just to start out, how you found the experience of being involved in this discussion with each other and the laureates. Let's start with you, Sofia.
So I found it really amazing. Like, the child in me was like jumping, still is like jumping out of happiness. Because when I started in science, my dream was like to win a Nobel Prize. And then as I grew up, that dream was like going downhill. But it's now like, it has inspired me again to work hard and try to be better.
Thank you very much, Sofia. Ignacio.
Yeah, for me, it was also a wonderful experience. Latin America science has a lot of challenges to overcome, in addition to a very present social inequality and political instability. So this is a very common topic to discuss among friends and colleagues. And this event allowed me to know the view of my peers and even a Nobel laureate such as Ben, which was my case. And it was surprised to know how all of us thought similarly about science communication, being a good scientist, or even the teaching of science. It was very rewarding to realize that we are in fact united by science, no matter the country we're from.
Thank you. Patricia.
Well, hello. I would say that my experience was a very fascinating one, because first we were able to hear the problems that exist in other countries, which is fascinating for me because many of them are very similar to what, I live in Bolivia, or the scientific community faces in Bolivia. And also the interest that people have. Of course, these are different, but it's very nice to be able to understand what they think. Also, in many times during the round table, we were able to reach very beautiful reflections about the role of science in society, the challenges that scientists face, and some important qualities, maybe intrinsic qualities about science that may lead us to a better future and to make the most of science, of course.
Thank you very much indeed. And Ariana.
So first, it's a pleasure to stay here again. And I think my experience, I really learned how to be the protagonist in my life. And I'm from Brazil. Brazil is not a rich country. And of course, my dream is one day be the Nobel Prize laureate too. And I have been learning so much here. I think I'm increasing like a good professional and like a good woman too, for be now representing that women can do this too. So I have been just learning a lot about all the problems that the world has and how the science, not only the health science, can resolve this. I have been learning about engineering, about economics, so about many things that we have problems right now in the world. And me, like medical student and a future doctor, I have been learning with Elizabeth about how to solve all these problems, how I can be a better human to solve all these problems. And it's just a pleasure to be here and talk with everyone again and just have been learning again.
Thank you very much indeed. How lovely. It's really very, very heartwarming to hear how the sessions have impacted you. I must say I worry about you all, because when we did the sound check for this, I asked you what you were doing for the weekend, and all of you said that you were working. So you're obviously a very dedicated foursome. maybe you're representative of all the scientists who were there. Ariana, you asked the question of what advice would you give, well, you asked the laureates, what advice would you give your younger self? As a result of the discussions, what advice would you give to a young scientist about how to make the most of science and themselves?
Wow. So I am really young for everything that I already did in my life. I am 22 years old. So I already did so many scientific research. And now the first thing that I do for all the students younger than me is when you begin some university, some medical school, or doesn't matter what course in some university, don't do only the university. So don't only study. Do the difference, because it's not only about scores inside the university, inside all the subjects. You need to be a different outside. Be a professional is not about work, it's about be a better human. So do different things, do extracurricular things, not involve only about your university and about your job. Do different things. Like me, I am a medical student, but I love learning about politics. I love about economy, because everything about this involves the medicine. So why people today is hungry in Africa? Why today we have so many war about religion? So everything about this involves medicine. It's because that I really like follow about the union, I don't know the name in English, sorry, it's ONU in Portuguese. So United Nation. Because there you learn so much about everything, all the problems in the world. So now all advice that I could give is be a different person. You can do. Doesn't matter if you are from Brazil, if you are from Chile, or if you are from US. You can be the different in all the world. You can impact the world. Is this that I say? And don't give it up about your dreams. You can do everything. We can do.
Thank you very much indeed. Sophia, you were nodding there. You talked in your session about the conversation with government and how scientists might best be involved in promoting that conversation and creating a useful dialogue. Has the session changed the way that you might approach that?
It has a little bit, because in my country, we have a lot of issues with the government and science funding and research, right? So sometimes I have the idea that sometimes I believe that, or some people believe that the government has to give everything to us, but we also need to work hard about it. And I believe that one thing that we can do, and I learned this from my colleagues in the dialogue, is that when the government is not doing something, then you can do it yourself. We can take an active role and show the people, show the society what we are doing, what our research is good for, and how it is beneficial for society, and not just rely on the government to do everything for us.
Thank you. You're all mentioning this point that you've learned by listening to each other, and it's very interesting that we brought you together to have this conversation. I guess you really should be talking to each other all the time anyway, and there's a great strength in that. But it's difficult. What are the barriers to doing this? Why do you think that people are not talking to each other as much as perhaps they should? Anybody?
Can I come on? Well, in my country, sometimes it was a moment in my life where I felt, there are not many physicists, right? At the moment, there are a little bit more, but there was a time where I felt like there was nobody around me that was studying the same thing that I was researching. So I felt very alone. And I always thought, well, if there's no one here, then probably there's no one in Guatemala, which is very nearby. But, and that was a thing that always made me stop contacting other people, because I didn't know that these people existed. But then through
courses and stuff, I met other people that were very near me. And then I thought to myself, okay, so it's much easier to reach them than what I thought. So it was basically a little bit of my fault because I didn't search for these people that were near me.
Does anybody else want to comment on that? Ignacio, maybe?
Yeah. Well, usually the main spaces where we can interact among local students in Latin America are congresses or meetings. And well, due to the pandemics, this became harder to achieve from last year. But one great thing that emerged from this was the online meetings. So just before the pandemics, the principal barriers, I think, was essentially the physical barriers. But with these online meetings and with this dialogue, for example, we can we learn that actually it's very easily to connect with others. The collaborations that we can create only via Zoom meeting, for example, are very great. In the pandemic, actually, in my laboratory, we started to collaborate with people in Colombia. And it was very easy. We had some data that we acquired before the pandemic. We shared them in a drive and they analyzed it, take a bit more data. When we here in Chile, we went to the laboratories due to the health issues. And that collaboration, maybe before the pandemic, would have relied only on physical interactions, just like traveling, for example. But with this online meetings and this online life, we learned that it's more easy than we thought to collaborate.
Yes, I suppose the barriers have really come down. And indeed, I mean, one of the questions you asked in your session was how people in Latin America can collaborate more effectively with each other and also with those outside of Latin America. Yes, the online has opened up a whole world, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Patricia, do you want to comment on this?
Oh, in this specific topic, I think that is a mixture of what Sofia and Ignacio said in the case of Bolivia, at least. First, because there aren't that many physicists or students of physics here, or science in general. And also that we do not have the habit of contacting each other, or don't have the space, the usual spaces, or more connections, canals, avenues to get in touch with each other. I think this is that problem of the first contact, if you will, is the one that has been troubling us. But given that we have recognized the issue, maybe we can work together to fix that. Provide some kind of platform where we can meet each other and just see if we can help each other.
I guess it really is a habit that you have to get into. Exactly. Well said. Yes, yes. Well, hopefully you and the others who are involved will, in part, be a vanguard for making this happen. Yeah. I wanted to play a video to you all. There is one Nobel laureate who, from Latin America, from Mexico, Mario Molina, who you all will all know of, who unfortunately died in 2020. And this being a Latin American dialogue, we'd like to pay tribute to him, but he'd also like to emphasize something he said about the ability to get things done when you open up the conversation to society, which is something that you, Patricia, in particular, brought up in your session. How should scientists best be members of society? So let's roll that video of Mario Molina.
We made these discoveries early 1970s, but it was only until 1985 that this international agreement was agreed upon. We did it, and the ozone layer is recovering. There was a problem that society had to respond to. We decided that we had to communicate this to society. But for people in government to respond, they often need to have public opinion in their favor. It was really not customary for scientists to go out to try to convince the public that something had to be done. But we realized If it is not us, then who? And if it's not now, when? Society has many challenges today, but among the most important ones is certainly climate change. So we have to keep working very hard. Let's be optimistic, but rational. If we work together, we all end up having a better world.
Mario, of course, was one of the people who was instrumental in proving that CFCs damage the ozone layer, and that discovery it finally led to a ban on CFCs and the gradual recovering of the hole in the ozone layer, particularly over Antarctica. It's a very hopeful story of science and science communication. It's a very long story, and as he points out with those words, it took a lot of convincing to make it happen. I wondered if any of you wanted to reflect on the message in that video and what it means for you as young scientists starting out and thinking about your journey and your conversation.
Well, if I may. One of the most interesting points raised in the roundtable, which I was part of, was this about when scientists, the scientific community, and the government have discrepancies, and it can get very ugly very fast. And what should we do? And do we have any responsibility inherent to our position as scientists? And because we have our problems, different kind of problems, which are not political in nature usually. But so should we be forced to intervene in this? But and the conclusions which we reached through the dialogue and also the opinions of Dr. Perlmutter led to a very interesting part in the conversation. So we talked about being humble and trying to approach people in accessible ways. And the question, again, regarding to the government was, should we try to work with them, or when they are against it, should we turn to the public and just forfeit any contact with the government? And the response of Dr. Perlmutter, which I find very inspiring, is we must try to do both. Sometimes one will work, sometimes the other one will work, but the most important thing is that we try and that we can't give up, because we have a lot to contribute in this sense. And if we have the opportunity to do it, we should try to make a difference in our countries.
Thank you.
Can I give a point?
Please.
Yeah. Now, just agreeing with Patricia say about, I asked a question for Elizabeth and about what she do when she thinks that everything will just go down about all the projects. So, because we said in our roundtable about burnout and about how is the mental health about a scientist, because it's too much pressure to have all the projects ready or too much issues about this. So, and she said, never give it up. Everyone will have some up moments and down moments. And now just to repeat what Patricia said, how it's important you just follow your dreams and trust that one day you will arrive there. And Elizabeth just said this for us, and it was really important for me. And now we have a world where we have so much anxiety about everything. So it's really important we avoid burnout. We avoid give it up just because we have a little problem or a big problem. Doesn't matter. You just need to keep going.
Thank you. Ignacio, you're nodding.
Yeah, it's due to a story that Ben told us in the roundtable. He said that in his doctorate thesis, I think, he was working about 8 months and all the experiments. And one supervisor, mentor, I don't really remember very well, but someone told him that maybe you are just burnt out. You just have to rest something. And he was told to go to a vacation 1 week with his friends. And after that vacation, I think he went to Germany. Every single experiment started to work. So yeah, the point that Ariana did about the mental health in this overwhelmed society is a very good one, and that we have to take care of it.
Thank you, Ignacio. Sophia, last comment to you.
I agree with the mental health issue. I believe in 100% in Ignacio's story, what he said, because I have been in that position where I am studying, right? And I don't understand anything and nothing is working. And then my dad, he's a physicist, so I have learned a lot from him. So he told me one time, okay, if nothing works, just leave everything there, go for a walk, and then come back with a rested mind, and you will find the answer. And I believe that this is true. Sometimes when we're science students, we believe that we must work all the time, never rest, and that's what makes a good scientist. But in reality, we need to rest, and we need to do other things to have a clear mind to be able to be successful.
Thank you very much indeed. You're clearly all such exceptional young scientists and so dedicated. I can quite see why you don't take vacations, but if referring back to the earlier comment about how you work your weekend, perhaps all 4 of you should just take a little time off just to refresh after this experience. But I think that everybody watching will feel that science is in very good hands, and that truly, this concept of united by science is absolutely true, listening to you all. I must say I've never been sadder to come to the end of a Nobel Prize dialogue, because it's just been such an enormous pleasure speaking to you and your colleagues across Latin America and the Caribbean. We can't thank you enough for taking part. And I hope very, very much we'll see you again in future conversations. But for now, it just remains for me to thank everybody who worked so hard to put all this together to make these exceptional conversations happen, and to say thank you very, very much for listening. Goodbye.